I remember pushing my daughter on the swing we hung from the old oak tree, the one that now stands sentinel over 200 guests. Her laughter was the only sound that mattered, her small hands gripping the ropes, her feet kicking at the summer sky. This land wasn't just dirt and grass to me. It was the entire archive of her childhood, every scraped knee and happy shout soaked into the soil. I used to think this place held only good memories, but as I stood there in my stiff suit, watching the sunlight catch the diamonds on her finger, I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. I was about to watch her marry a man who looked at this sacred ground and saw only dollar signs. What do you call it when the happiest day of your life feels like the beginning of a funeral? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. My daughter Lily looked like a dream, her white dress a whisper against the green lawn. But the man whose arm she held, Leo, had a smile that was all geometry and no warmth. It was a perfectly constructed thing, designed to charm, but it never quite reached his eyes. His eyes were like a banker's ledger, cold, assessing, always calculating value. I'd felt it from the day Lily brought him home. He'd shaken my hand, his grip firm, but his gaze was already sweeping over my property, from the rolling hills down to the creek that bordered the south pasture. He hadn't seen a family home. He'd seen a portfolio. I tried to tell myself I was just a protective father, an old man seeing shadows where there were none. But a farmer knows the weather in his bones, and I knew a storm was coming. The guests mingled, champagne flutes chimed, and a string quartet played something soft and hopeful. It was all so beautiful, a perfect illusion. I watched Leo work the crowd, his hand possessively on the small of Lily's back. He'd clap a shoulder here, laugh at a joke there, but his eyes kept flicking back to me, a little too often, a little too sharp. It was a hunter's glance, checking to see if his prey was still cornered. Do you think I was too forgiving here? Maybe I should have put my foot down months ago. But how do you tell your only child that the man she loves is a viper? She was blinded by what she thought was love, a whirlwind romance, expensive gifts, promises of a life I could never give her. He'd built a glittering cage around her, and she thought it was a palace. He finally broke away from a group of his city friends and made his way toward me. He moved with a slick confidence that always set my teeth on edge. "William," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Quite a turnout. This property cleans up nicely." There it was. Not your home or this beautiful place. This property. It was the language of an auctioneer. I just nodded, the knot in my stomach tightening. "It's for Lily," I said quietly. "Everything I have is for her." Leo's smile widened, but it was all teeth. "That's what I love to hear," he said, lowering his voice. "Because you and I need to have a little chat. About the future. Our future." He gestured vaguely at the fields around us. "Lily and I have been drawing up some incredible plans. A resort, maybe some luxury condos. The zoning is agricultural, but my lawyers are miracle workers." I felt the blood drain from my face. He spoke as if the deal was already done, as if my life's work was just a plot of land waiting for his bulldozers. I saw the ghost of Lily's swing, the memory of her laughter, being crushed under the weight of his ambition. This wasn't just my home. It was my legacy, the one thing I planned to pass down to her, for her to pass down to her children, for them to grow up on, not to sell off. I looked past him, searching for Lily. She was laughing with her bridesmaids, oblivious. My heart ached with a terrible sorrow. I had to warn her, I had to make her see. I excused myself, my legs feeling unsteady, and walked over to my daughter. I touched her arm gently. "Sweetheart, can I have a word?" Her smile faltered when she saw my face. We stepped away from the music toward the quiet shade of the old oak. "Dad, what's wrong? You look pale." I took a deep breath, the scent of cut grass and impending rain filling my lungs. "It's Leo," I started, trying to keep my voice even. "The things he's saying about the land. about his plans. I told her what he'd said, the casual way he'd talked about destroying everything I'd built, everything her mother and I had poured our souls into. I expected shock, maybe even anger on my behalf. Instead, a shuttered look came over her face. It was a look I'd seen a lot since Leo came into her life. "Dad," she said, her voice laced with an unfamiliar impatience. "We've talked about this. Leo has vision. He's trying to build a future for us, for our family." "By tearing down ours?" I asked, my voice cracking. She sighed, a sound of pure exasperation, as if I were a child being difficult. "It's just land," she said, the words striking me like a physical blow. "You can't live in the past forever. Leo knows what's best for us." She straightened the lapel of my suit, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt deeply dismissive. "Please don't make a scene. Not today." She gave me a quick, sterile kiss on the cheek and walked away. Back to her friends. Back to him, leaving me standing alone in the shadow of the tree where I had once pushed her toward the sky. It wasn't just land, it was my life, my love, my memories. And my own daughter had just told me it meant nothing. My late wife, Martha, used to press her ear to the ground after a spring rain and swear she could hear the seeds waking up. She said this land had a heartbeat, a rhythm you could only feel if you loved it enough to listen. As I sat in the front row watching my daughter exchange vows with a man who would gladly silence that heartbeat for a profit, I could only hear the frantic pounding in my own chest. The minister spoke of union, of two becoming one, but all I saw was a hostile takeover. How can a place so full of love be the stage for such a profound and quiet betrayal? The ceremony was an out-of-body experience. I saw my lips move in a smile for the photographer. I felt my hand clap Leo on the shoulder when prompted, but I wasn't really there. I was a ghost at my own family's future. The sound of their voices making promises, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, was a dull, meaningless hum. Leo's voice was steady and confident, the sound of a man closing a deal. Lily's was soft, but underneath it, I heard an echo of the girl who told me, "It's just land." I focused on the sounds around me to keep from breaking. The rustle of 100 programs, the polite cough from an uncle in the third row, the distant mocking chirp of a blue jay. Each sound was a pinprick, reminding me that this nightmare was real. Later, under the white canvas of the reception tent, the toasts began. The air was thick with fake cheer and expensive perfume. Have you ever had to smile through pain so sharp it felt like swallowing glass? That was me, for 2 solid hours. Leo's best man told a stale story from their college days. Lily's maid of honor cried and called her a sister. Then Leo stood, tapping his champagne flute with a spoon. The chatter died instantly. He held everyone captive with that easy, predatory charm. He thanked his parents, he thanked Lily's friends, and then his eyes found mine across the sea of faces. "And I have to give a special thank you," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "to my new father-in-law, William." A smattering of polite applause rippled through the tent. I felt 200 pairs of eyes turn to me. "William is a man of the earth," Leo continued, a smirk playing on his lips. "He built a fine, humble foundation here. He protected this land, kept it safe, waiting for a vision, for someone to come along and finally unlock its true potential." The insult was so clean, so perfectly disguised as a compliment, that most people were nodding in agreement. He was painting me as a simple-minded caretaker, a steward for his grand ambition. "Lily and I are dreamers," he boomed, raising his glass higher. "And standing here on this incredible piece of property, we don't just see a past, we see a future, a legacy of our own. So let's raise a glass, to new beginnings." The crowd roared its approval. To new beginnings. They cheered and drank. I looked at Lily. She was gazing up at him, her eyes shining with pure adoration. She didn't see the knife he'd just slid between my ribs. She saw a king. The air in the tent became suffocating. I needed to get out. mumbled an excuse to the cousin sitting beside me and slipped out the back of the tent, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The manicured celebration faded behind me, replaced by the familiar chorus of crickets and the smell of damp earth. I walked toward the old barn, the one place on this entire property that still felt like mine. Its weathered wood held the memory of my father, and his father before him. It was a sanctuary. But as I drew closer, I heard voices from inside, low and urgent. One was Leo's. I stopped in the shadows, my hand resting on the rough, splintered wood of the door. "The old man is being sentimental, but he'll cave," Leo was saying, his voice stripped of its public charm, now sharp and impatient. "He has to. My creditors aren't nearly as patient as he is." A different voice, one of his groomsmen, laughed. "And Lily? She's really on board with selling her childhood home?" There was a pause, and then Leo's voice, colder than a winter frost. "Lily has been on board since the first diamond bracelet. She believes whatever I need her to believe." When Lily was 7, she fell from the hayloft. I heard the thud and then a terrifying silence before the scream. I ran faster than I ever had, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I found her on the dusty floor, clutching her arm, her face pale with shock and pain. I scooped her up and she buried her face in my shoulder, trusting me completely to make it better. Now, as I stood outside the barn door, the sound of Leo's cold, calculated words echoing in the space between heartbeats, I felt like the one who had taken the fall. Only this time there was no one to run to, and the pain was a fracture deep in my soul. The air tasted metallic, like an old coin. I leaned my forehead against the rough, cool wood of the barn, my knuckles scraping against the grain as I clenched my fists. She believes whatever I need her to believe. The words played over and over in my head, a venomous mantra. He hadn't just stolen her heart. He had hollowed it out and filled it with his own poison. I felt the cold sweat on my palms, the tremor in my hands. Rage was a hot, useless thing coiling in my gut, but beneath it was a grief so profound it threatened to pull me under. I wasn't just losing my land, I had already lost my daughter. I stumbled back from the barn, away from their voices, moving like a sleepwalker through the darkness that pooled between the party lights. I needed to be somewhere solid, somewhere real. I ended up in my study, the one room in the house that was still entirely mine. The scent of old books and worn leather greeted me like a friend. My wife Martha's portrait sat on the corner of my oak desk, her smile gentle, her eyes knowing. I sank into my chair, the leather sighing under my weight. I picked up her picture, the silver frame cold to the touch. "What do I do, Martha?" I whispered into the silent room. "How do I fight for her when she's fighting for him?" Of course, there was no answer. Just the quiet judgment of the past. I saw her everywhere in this room. In the faded armchair where she'd read to Lily, in the pressed flower she'd used as a bookmark, still tucked inside an old copy of Emerson. She had loved this land, not for its value, but for its spirit. She'd have seen through Leo in a heartbeat. She would have called him a man with a hollow core and warned Lily away. But I wasn't Martha. I had wanted to see my daughter happy, and I had mistaken glitter for gold. What would you do if your own child was a stranger standing right in front of you? I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a bottle of brandy and a single glass. I poured a measure, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. It burned a clean line down my throat, a fire that did little to warm the ice in my veins. This wasn't just about a resort or condos. This was about erasure. Leo didn't want to build on my land. He wanted to obliterate my life, my history, and build his monument on the rubble. And he was using my daughter as his primary tool of demolition. The thought hardened something inside me. The grief was still there, a permanent ache, but a new feeling was taking root beside it. Resolve, a cold, quiet certainty. This was not over. This was my home. He would not take it. I would not let him. I heard the muffled sound of music and laughter from the tent, a world away. I sat there for what felt like an eternity. The silence of the study my only companion. The face in the portrait my only witness. I was marshaling my strength, preparing for a war I never wanted to fight. The study door creaked open. Lily stood in the doorway, her white dress looking like an apparition. Behind her stood Leo, his smile plastered back on his face, though his eyes were hard and questioning. "Dad, there you are," Lily said, her voice a little strained. "We were looking for you. Everyone is getting ready for the father-daughter dance." Leo stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. It was meant to be a familiar son-in-law gesture, but the slick, cold feel of his hand through my suit jacket was like a snake's touch. "We were just about to cut the cake," he said smoothly. "But first, William, I believe we had something to finish, a conversation about the future. I brought the papers. Time to make it official." He held the documents out like a death certificate for a life I was still living. The papers were crisp, white, and deadly, a sheaf of legal jargon that felt heavier than a tombstone. On top was a pen, a sleek silver instrument that looked like a scalpel. He wasn't asking, he was instructing. The smile on his face was gone, replaced by the grim finality of a predator who knows the hunt is over. Was this the moment he had planned all along, the true climax of the wedding? I looked at my daughter. Lily stood beside him, her hand on his arm, but her eyes were fixed on me. They were pleading. "Dad, please," she whispered, her voice so thin it was almost carried away by the distant music. "It's for our future, it's for us, just sign it, don't ruin this." Ruin this? I felt a laugh, cold and bitter, rise in my throat, but I choked it down. I looked from her desperate face to the papers, then back to Leo's cold, expectant eyes. The sight of them together, a united front against me, was a physical blow. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it filled the small study with an unshakable weight. It was the simplest, most honest word I had left. Leo's jaw tightened. A flicker of something ugly, pure, undiluted rage, flashed in his eyes before being masked again by that veneer of control. "William, let's not be difficult," he said, his voice dangerously low. "This is a formality, a wedding gift. You said yourself everything you have is for her." "She is my daughter," I replied, my voice as steady as I could make it. "Not a line of credit. This land is her heritage, not a startup fund for your next venture." Lily flinched, pulling her hand away from his arm. "Dad, you don't understand his business." "Oh, I think for the first time I finally do," I said, my gaze locked on Leo. For a heart-stopping second, I thought he might lunge at me right there in the study. Instead, an even more sinister idea took shape on his face. He smiled, a wide, terrible thing. "You're right," he said, his tone suddenly light and theatrical. "This is a family matter. It shouldn't be discussed in a dusty old room. It should be shared." Before I could react, he grabbed the papers in one hand and my arm in the other, his grip like steel. "Let's go, William. Let's go celebrate your generosity with our guests." He pulled me out of the study and through the hallway, back toward the glowing white tent. I stumbled, trying to wrench my arm free, but his grip was relentless. We emerged into the bright lights and the sea of faces. The string quartet had just finished a song, and in the momentary lull, 200 heads turned toward us. The sight of the groom dragging the father of the bride by the arm silenced the room completely. The clinking of glasses stopped. The whispers died. We were on a stage, bathed in a spotlight of shock and confusion. Leo, ever the showman, released me with a shove that sent me a step forward. He strode to the center of the dance floor, tapping a glass with the silver pen. The sound was sharp, demanding. "Friends, family," he announced, his voice booming with manufactured warmth. "A slight change of plans before the cake cutting. My wonderful new father-in-law, William, has a very special wedding gift he'd like to present to Lily and me." He turned to me, his smile a predator's baring of teeth. "William, please tell them." He held the deed out to me again, right there in front of everyone. The air was thick with a tension so heavy I could taste it. I saw the faces of my neighbors, my friends, my family, all watching, waiting. Do you think she even saw what he was doing, or was she already too lost? I looked at Lily, whose face had gone deathly pale. This was it, the final betrayal. "This land is not a gift to be given," I said, my voice clear and carrying in the unnatural silence. "It is my home. It is Lily's birthright. It will not be sold to pay for your debts." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Leo's face transformed. The mask didn't just slip. He tore it off and threw it to the ground. In its place was a mask of pure fury. "You old fool," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper that seemed to travel across the entire tent. "You will not ruin me." And then he moved. It was so fast I barely registered it. His hand came up, open-palmed, and connected with the side of my face. The sound was a sickening crack, an ugly, wet sound that shattered the silence. My head snapped to the side, and the world tilted violently. A starburst of pain exploded behind my eye. I lost my balance, stumbling backward, my hand flying out to catch myself on a table laden with champagne glasses, sending them crashing to the ground in a symphony of destruction. I looked up through a haze of pain and humiliation. 200 guests were frozen in horror. My daughter stood there, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with a shock that was years too late. Leo stood over me, his chest heaving, his face a mask of rage. I slowly, deliberately, pushed myself upright. I straightened my jacket. I met his burning gaze and I felt no fear. Only a profound, chilling calm. I turned my back on him. I turned my back on my daughter. Without a word, I walked out of that tent, leaving the wreckage of the party behind me. The shocked silence followed me out into the cool night air. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the property, my phone feeling heavy and solid in my trembling hand. I swiped the screen open, my thumb hovering over a single name in my contacts. It was a name Leo would know, a name his creditors would know even better. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear, the sound of it ringing a quiet promise of the storm to come. The night air was cold against my throbbing cheek, a welcome shock that cleared the fog of pain and disbelief. Each cricket chirping in the tall grass sounded like a tiny ticking clock, counting down the seconds to a detonation. I walked past the manicured lawns and the fairy lights, heading for the gravel of the main driveway, the crunch of my dress shoes a steady, resolute rhythm. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward my last resort, my one hidden ace. The name on my phone screen read, Marcus Thorne. It wasn't a name I used often. Marcus was a ghost from a past I had deliberately buried under decades of soil and quiet farm life. He was my brother-in-law, Martha's younger brother. While I had chosen the land, Marcus had chosen the law. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a shark in a city of sharks, a man who dismantled fortunes and reputations with the surgical precision of a master craftsman. We hadn't spoken in years, not since Martha's funeral, but our bond was forged in something stronger than pleasantries. He had loved his sister fiercely, and by extension, he had always vowed to protect her legacy. This land, this home, was the heart of that legacy. The phone rang 3 times and I almost lost my nerve. Then, his voice came through, gravelly and sharp, even through the speaker. "William, this is unexpected." There was no small talk with Marcus. He was a man who dealt in crises and had no time for anything else. "I need your help, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "It's the farm. It's Lily." I told him everything. I started with Leo's arrival, the smooth talk and the cold eyes. I told him about the veiled threats, the talk of condos, the conversation I overheard in the barn. And then I told him about what had just happened in the tent, the public demand, the deed, the slap that still stung my skin and my pride. As I spoke, the taste of blood, coppery and sharp, filled my mouth from a cut on my inner cheek. I leaned against the rough bark of the old oak at the end of the driveway, the same tree where Lily's swing once hung, and listened to the silence on the other end of the line. For a moment I feared he wouldn't believe me, or worse, that he wouldn't care. What if he thought I was just some pathetic old man, crying over a family squabble? "Give me his full name," Marcus said finally. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but it held the chilling calm of a gathering storm. "Leo Vance." "Are you still on the property?" "Yes, by the main gate." "Good," Marcus said. "Stay there. I'm sending a car for you. It will be there in 20 minutes. Get in it. Go to the city office. I'm about to text you. Don't talk to anyone, especially not Lily or her new husband. Don't answer their calls. Am I clear?" "Crystal," I said. "Marcus, what are you going to do?" There was a pause, and for the first time, I heard a trace of something personal in his voice. It was the cold, protective fury he had always reserved for those who hurt his family. "Martha loved that farm," he said simply. "And that boy just laid his hands on you. I'm going to introduce him to a concept he's clearly unfamiliar with. Consequences." The line went dead. A moment later, a text buzzed with an address. Just as he'd promised, 20 minutes later, a sleek black car with tinted windows pulled silently up to the gate. It felt like something out of a movie. The back door opened, and a driver in a dark suit simply nodded at me. I got in without a word, and the car pulled away, leaving the distant, confused lights of my daughter's wedding reception shrinking in the rearview mirror. As we drove, my phone began to buzz incessantly. First Lily, then Lily again, then a number I didn't recognize, which I assumed was Leo. I stared at my daughter's name on the screen, my thumb hovering over the answer button. My heart ached. I wanted to hear her voice, to know if there was any remorse, any sign of the girl I had raised. But Marcus's instructions were clear. I silenced the phone and dropped it into my pocket, the buzzing against my leg a phantom vibration of the family I was leaving behind. The city was a blur of lights, a different world from the quiet dark of the farm. The car dropped me at a skyscraper that stabbed at the night sky, a temple of glass and steel. Marcus was waiting for me in a conference room on the 40th floor. The room was sterile, intimidating, with a wall of windows that looked down on the city like a god. Spread across a massive mahogany table were documents, files, and a laptop already open to a web of information. Marcus looked older, his hair more silver than I remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and unforgiving. He didn't offer a hug or condolences. He just pointed to a chair. "Sit," he said. "We have work to do. I've already been digging. Your son-in-law is not just ambitious, William. He's desperate." He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a dizzying array of numbers, all in red. Lawsuits, liens, default notices. Leo Vance wasn't a visionary businessman building a future. He was a gambler on a historic losing streak, and my farm was his last desperate bet to save himself from total ruin. And then Marcus clicked on another file. It was a scanned document, a prenuptial agreement. "He had Lily sign this a week ago," Marcus said, his finger tapping the screen. "It's ironclad. It essentially gives him control over any gifted assets she acquires after the marriage. He wasn't just planning on getting the land, William." He looked me straight in the eye, and the final piece of the ugly puzzle slotted into place. He was planning on divorcing her the second the deed was in his name and leaving her with absolutely nothing. I stared at the clause on the screen, the legal language a cold, intricate web designed to trap my daughter. Gifted assets. The phrase was a dagger. He had twisted the very concept of a gift, a father's love, into a weapon to be used against her. The slap in the tent wasn't the climax of his plan. It was a panicked improvisation. The real violence was here, in these carefully chosen words, a quiet assassination of her future. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had been worried about losing my land, but this was infinitely worse. He was going to strip Lily of her home, her inheritance, and her dignity, leaving her with nothing but the shame of his betrayal. The fury that had been simmering inside me now solidified into a block of ice. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice a low rasp. Marcus leaned back in his chair, the city lights behind him creating a severe silhouette. We don't react, William. We dismantle, he said. His entire financial structure is a house of cards built on debt and deception. All it needs is a firm push. He spent the next hour laying out the strategy, his voice a calm, precise instrument of destruction. We weren't going to sue him. That was too slow, too messy. We were going to trigger a cascade. Marcus had already identified Leo's primary lenders, a consortium of private equity vultures who had a zero-tolerance policy for fraud. It turned out Leo had secured his last round of funding by listing my farm as a pending asset, a guaranteed collateral he had yet to actually possess. He had committed wire fraud, a serious federal offense. The first calls will be made at 9 a.m. sharp, Marcus stated, looking at his watch. By noon, his credit lines will be frozen. By the end of business, his partners will have been served, and the authorities will have been alerted. By morning, his name will be mud from one end of this city to the other. He won't have the money to fight back. I sat there, stunned by the speed and brutality of it all. It felt less like a legal maneuver and more like a controlled demolition. I returned to the farm in Marcus's car just before dawn. The party was long over. The tent was a ghostly white skeleton in the morning mist. A few abandoned champagne glasses littered the lawn like fallen soldiers. The house was dark and silent. It felt violated, tainted. I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, the prenuptial agreement Marcus had printed for me sitting on the desk, waiting. Around 10:30, I heard a car skid to a halt in the driveway. The front door burst open. It was Lily, her face pale and streaked with tears, her wedding dress wrinkled and stained. She looked broken. "Dad, what did you do?" she cried, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and accusation. "Leo's accounts are frozen. His investors are pulling out. He got a call from the district attorney's office. He says you've ruined him." I didn't say a word. I simply pushed the copy of the prenuptial agreement across the desk toward her. She looked down at it, confused. "What is this?" "Read Clause 7B, I said softly. "The one about gifted assets." Her eyes scanned the page, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then I saw the moment it clicked. A slow, dawning horror crept across her features, her skin turning ashen. Her hand went to her mouth as she read it again, the legal jargon suddenly becoming terrifyingly clear. She sank into the chair opposite me, the paper fluttering from her numb fingers. He told me it was just a formality," she whispered, her voice cracking. "To protect his existing assets. He said it was standard. He was going to take this land and leave you with nothing," I said, the words heavy but necessary. The wedding, the promises, it was all a business transaction. Just then, Leo's car roared up the driveway. He stormed into the house, his face a mask of desperation and rage. He saw the prenup on the floor and then looked at Lily's shattered expression. The game was up. He rounded on me, his eyes wild. "You," he snarled. "You senile old fossil. You couldn't just die and leave it alone, could you?" He took a step toward me, his hands clenched into fists. But before he could take another, Lily was on her feet. For the first time, the illusion was gone from her eyes, replaced by a fire I hadn't seen since she was a little girl who wouldn't back down from a fight. "Get out," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Get out of my father's house." Leo looked at her, stunned. "Lily, baby, you don't understand. He's twisting things." "I understand perfectly," she said, stepping between us, protecting me. "I understand that you used me. I understand you lied to me. And I understand that you raised your hand to my father. Now get out." His face contorted, and for a second, I saw the venomous creature he truly was. Then, defeated, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed through the quiet house. Lily stood there, her back to me, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I came around the desk and put my hands on her arms. She collapsed into me, crying into my chest like she had when she was 7 years old and had fallen from the hayloft. She was finally home. In the end, I didn't lose my land. I almost lost my daughter. I learned that the most dangerous threats don't announce themselves with thunder and lightning, but with a charming smile and a silver pen. True wealth isn't in what you own, but in what you can't bear to lose. And true strength is knowing when to call for help to protect it. What's the biggest lesson a family crisis has ever taught you? Share your thoughts in the comments below.